Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when your neighbor's gaze lingers just a little too long? It's a common unease, but for some, it turns into outright terror. Studies show that exposure to neighborhood violence can lead to chronic stress and health issues, like elevated cortisol levels affecting millions in high-poverty areas, where violent crimes occur at rates far above the national average. Today, we're diving into 3 very scary true neighbor horror stories based on real-life accounts that prove the person next door might be your worst nightmare. Let me take you back to when I was 7 years old, 2nd grade, living in a quiet little cul-de-sac in a working-class neighborhood in Ohio. Our house was a modest 2-story with thin walls, the kind where you could hear your neighbor cough if they did it loud enough. Next door lived a family that, on the surface, seemed totally normal. A boy exactly my age named Cody. His mom Lisa, who always waved and smiled when she took out the trash, and her husband Mark, Cody's stepdad, a big, quiet guy with a mustache who worked construction and rarely spoke to anyone. Cody wasn't allowed outside much. His mom homeschooled him, so we only played together when she randomly decided it was okay. I remember feeling bad for him because he always looked so pale and tired, like he never saw the sun. One night in early November, I remember, because it was right after Halloween, and I still had candy hidden under my bed. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to the most horrifying sound I'd ever heard in my life. It wasn't a scream at first. It was this wet, gurgling choke, followed by a woman shrieking my name. Not my name exactly, but help. Somebody help. Over and over, mixed with banging on the shared wall so hard I thought the drywall was going to cave in. I bolted upright in bed, heart slamming against my ribs. Then came the worst part. A man's voice roaring, "You stupid B***Shay, you think you can leave me?" Followed by a sickening thud, then another, and another. The screaming turned into these awful, bubbly gasps. I ran to my parents' room, crying and shaking, and my dad literally vaulted out of bed, threw on pants, and told me to call 911 right now. I was the one who had to talk to the dispatcher. My voice was trembling so badly I could barely get the address out. I remember her asking, "Is anyone hurt?" and me whispering, "I think she's dying." While I was on the phone, my dad grabbed a baseball bat and ran outside. By the time the first police car screeched up less than 4 minutes later, but it felt like hours, the screaming had stopped completely. It was just eerie silence, and flashing red and blue lights painting the walls of my bedroom. What happened, we learned later, was that Mark had come home drunk and accused Lisa of cheating. She told him she was leaving and taking Cody with her. He snapped, grabbed a hunting knife from the kitchen drawer, and stabbed her once in the neck and twice in the top of the skull. The knife actually got stuck in her head on the second blow. He had to yank it out with both hands. She managed to crawl toward our shared wall, pounding on it with her last strength, which is why I heard everything so clearly. Cody, only 7 years old, was hiding under his bed the entire time. When the police broke down the door, they found Lisa dead on the living room floor, in a pool of blood that had spread all the way to the front door. Mark was sitting on the couch, covered in her blood, just staring at the TV, like nothing happened. He didn't even resist arrest. Cody spent the rest of that night and the next day at our house. He didn't cry once. He just sat on our couch wrapped in one of my mom's quilts, staring at the carpet. We tried to give him cereal. He wouldn't eat. I remember asking him if he wanted to play Nintendo. He looked at me with the emptiest eyes and whispered. My mom's head opened up. That sentence still haunts me 20+ years later. Mark ended up pleading guilty to aggravated murder and got 24 years to life. Lisa's real father, Cody's biological dad, took custody, and they moved across the state. We never saw Cody again. A week after the murder, crime scene cleaners came. I watched from my bedroom window as they carried out bucket after bucket of bio-waste and rolled up the blood-soaked carpet in black plastic. The house sat empty for years. No one would rent it. Kids at school started calling it the murder house. For months afterward, I couldn't sleep without the hall light on. Every creak in the walls made me think he had come back somehow. Even now, as an adult, I still flinch when I hear raised voices through an apartment wall. The scariest part, less than a year earlier, Lisa had confided in my mom over the fence that Mark scared her sometimes when he drank, but she insisted he'd never hurt her or Cody. Everyone on the street thought they were just a regular family with the usual struggles. They weren't. That night taught a 7-year-old kid the most brutal lesson imaginable. Monsters don't always look like monsters, and sometimes the thinnest wall in the world is the only thing separating you from one. This happened when I was 22, freshly moved into my first real adult apartment in a massive complex in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. It was one of those sprawling places with 4-story buildings, outdoor stairwells, and a mix of college kids, young families, and a few older residents. I took a second-floor unit facing the courtyard because it was cheaper, and had a tiny balcony within a week of moving in. I noticed the robots. They looked like something a bored engineering student would build for fun. Little 4-wheeled platforms about the size of a microwave, with a GoPro strapped on top, blinking red and blue LEDs, and a cheap speaker that occasionally played creepy circus music, or distorted children's laughter. The guy who owned them, we'll call him Dale, would roll them out at random hours, 3 a.m. noon, whenever. He'd park one at the bottom of every stairwell, one pointed directly at the playground, and one that just slowly circled the parking lot, like a shark. Dale was in his mid-40s, always wore the same stained gray hoodie no matter the weather, and had this flat, unblinking stare. He never said hello. He'd just watch you from his patio while sipping a Monster energy drink, one hand resting on what looked like a remote control box with a dozen tiny joysticks. At first people laughed it off. He's just a nerd, the leasing office said when we complained. It's his hobby. The cameras are for security. Then the stories started trickling in. A mom on the 3rd floor caught one of the robots parked under her daughter's bedroom window for over an hour, lens pointed straight up at the glass. Another neighbor found a robot wedged against her front door at 2 a.m., recording. When she kicked it away, Dale came storming out, yelling that she'd damaged his property. The worst incident involved a 9-year-old girl who lived across the breezeway from him. Let's call her Emily. One afternoon, Emily dropped her keys on the stairs. Dale found them almost instantly, showed up at her apartment, and refused to hand them over until her single mom let him inside to make sure she was safe. While the mom was distracted looking for a thank you snack, Dale picked Emily up off the ground, squeezed her too hard, and slid his hand down the back of her pants. Emily screamed. Mom came running, and Dale bolted. The mom called the police. That's when we all found out he was already on the sex offender registry. 2 prior convictions, one for child pornography possession, one for rape of a minor under 13. He'd served 8 years and had only been out for 18 months. The robots. He'd built them in prison during vocational electronics training and kept improving them after release. After the groping incident, parents went berserk. We printed out his registry page and taped it to every bulletin board. We started a group chat with photos every time a robot appeared. Someone spray-painted pedo across his front door in neon orange. Management still did nothing, claiming his lease was ironclad and the groping wasn't on property, so they couldn't evict. For 6 straight months, we lived under surveillance. You'd step outside and hear the whine of tiny motors. You'd come home from work and find a robot sitting right in front of your door like a mechanical guard dog. At night, the red recording lights glowed through people's blinds. One couple broke their lease and moved out after finding a robot inside their patio storage closet. Dale had somehow picked the lock. The final straw came when Dale tried to barricade himself in his unit after the city finally issued an eviction notice for an unrelated parole violation. Police had to ram the door. Inside they found walls, covered ceiling to floor with printed still photos of children from the complex, hundreds of them, hard drives full of footage from the robots, and a hand-drawn map labeling every apartment with kids by age and bedroom window location. He's back in prison now, life sentence this time, no parole. The complex quietly removed every trace of the robots and offered the affected families a month of free rent as a goodwill gesture. Most of us moved out anyway. I still can't hear the sound of small electric motors like those kids' toy Jeeps at Christmas. Without my stomach dropping, and every time I move into a new place, I check the sex offender map before I even look at the kitchen, because sometimes the monster doesn't hide in the shadows. Sometimes he hides behind a blinking red light on wheels, and a smile that never reaches his eyes. I grew up in a rundown trailer park on the edge of a small Rust Belt town in western Pennsylvania. 37 lots, half of them permanently occupied, the other half seasonal or abandoned. Gravel roads, rusted swing sets, bonfires every weekend. Everyone knew everyone's business. Or so we thought. There were 3 men in that park who, looking back now as an adult, were predators hiding in plain sight. I was too young to understand then, but the memories still crawl under my skin. When I was 6, my mom worked double shifts at the diner, so I was often left to roam. Mr. Gary lived 3 trailers down in a single wide, with Confederate flags in the windows, and a fire pit that never went cold. He was always outside in a lawn chair, drinking Busch Tall Boys, waving kids over with popsicles and quarters. One evening in late summer, he asked me to sit with him, just until the fire dies down. I remember the sky turning purple, the crickets screaming, and him begging me not to leave yet. "Stay a little longer, sweetheart. It gets lonely." His hand rested on my knee the entire time, thumb rubbing slow circles. Something felt wrong in my stomach, but I was 6 and he was an adult. So I stayed until my older cousin finally came looking for me. Less than a year later, Mr. Gary murdered the man who lived behind him, Ronnie, with a framing hammer. Ronnie had been sleeping with Gary's wife, while Gary was in county jail for a bar fight. When Gary got out, he invited Ronnie over to talk it out, got him drunk, then beat his skull in beside that same fire pit. He dragged the body into the woods, buried it under leaves, and went on hosting cookouts like nothing happened. The smell finally gave it away 2 weeks later, when dogs started digging. Gary got life without parole. I still can't smell campfire smoke without tasting panic. Tommy lived across the lane with his wife and 3 little girls. He was the guy who fixed everyone's bikes for free, and always had cartoons playing on his big TV. My mom trusted him, so when she had to work late, she'd drop me off there. I was for the first time, he told me, point blank, "When you get older, I'm going to marry your mommy and we'll all live together." Then he'd hug me too long, pressing my face into his belly that smelled like cigarettes and motor oil. Years later, when I was in middle school, I learned Tommy had done 15 years in state prison for raping his 12-year-old cousin when he was 19. The cousin lived 2 towns over. No one in the park knew until he got drunk one night and bragged about it to the wrong person. He also used to stare through windows at a teenage girl with Down syndrome who lived next door. I remember catching him crouched outside her bedroom at 1 a.m., just watching her sleep through the screen. When she woke up and saw him, he waved like it was normal and walked away. Last was Uncle Rick, not my real uncle, just what all the kids called him. He lived alone in a silver Airstream with blackout curtains. He'd let us come inside to play Atari and drink flat orange soda. He was gentle, soft-spoken, gave us quarters for the laundromat arcade, but he always wanted the girls to sit on his lap, and he'd rest his hands way too high on our thighs. I found out in my 20s that Rick had molested at least 4 girls in that park between 1989 and 1996. All under 10 years old. One of them was my best friend at the time. She never told anyone until we were adults, because her own mother didn't believe her, and called her a liar. Rick died of a heart attack in 2008, before anyone pressed charges. The park itself is still there. Same rusted mailboxes, same fire pits. I drove past it a few years ago. Someone had spray-painted Pedo Park on the entrance sign in dripping red letters. It had been half-heartedly covered with gray primer, but you could still read it clear as day. People always joke about trashy trailer parks being dangerous, but the stats don't actually show higher violent crime rates than any other low-income area. What they do show is isolation, fewer streetlights, slower police response, families too poor to move, and a code of silence that protects monsters because everyone is terrified of DCS or losing what little they have. I was one of the lucky ones. I got out at 17 and never went back. But every time I hear gravel crunch under tires, or smell burning leaves, or see an old man sitting alone by a fire, I'm 6 years old again, frozen in a lawn chair while the sky goes dark, and a hand I trusted squeezes my knee too tight. Some monsters don't need to hide. They just wait for the sun to go down. These stories remind us that evil can live right next door, disguised as the everyday. If you've had a creepy neighbor encounter, share it in the comments, but stay safe out there, and maybe get to know who's watching from across the fence. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true horror. Sleep tight.